The slap echoed through the market like a gunshot. Elijah's face snapped sideways, blood blooming from his lip as rotten fruit splattered at his feet. "Don't touch my cart, animal!" barked the merchant, shaking his gold-ringed hand. The boy didn't speak, didn't fight back. His deep brown eyes just stared, burning. 16, barefoot, skin like polished obsidian, muscles carved by hunger and survival. His hoodie hung in shreds, but he stood proud, taller than anyone dared to admit. Children giggled. Women averted their eyes. A priest crossed himself. And yet Elijah whispered only this: "The forest knows who I am." They called him mad. They called him cursed. But the forest listened. That night, 4 boys with clean fingernails and cruel laughter followed him past the chapel ruins. Aaron, the baker's son, led them, shirtless, smug, smelling of wine and fire. "He thinks he's a prince of trees," he mocked, holding a shovel like a scepter. They beat Elijah under the moonlight, laughing when he didn't scream. Then they dragged him to an old pit behind the crypt, a grave left from plague years. They tossed his body in like garbage, bones cracking against the stones below. "Tell the forest we said hi," Aaron spat, before shoveling earth on top. Elijah's last breath was silent, not fear, but fury. As the soil pressed against his ribs, he thought of light. And the forest answered. Roots brushed against his skin like fingers tracing an ancient map. In the suffocating dark, Elijah's heart slowed, not to die, but to listen. Something ancient awakened beneath the moss-veiled tombs. A pulse, a warmth, a voice, not of man, but of earth itself. "Rise, child of sorrow." His spine arched, his chest glowed, his wounds closed as if kissed by flame. Visions flooded him, emerald halls, beasts bowing, towers made of crystal bark. When Elijah's fist broke through the dirt, dawn broke with it. He emerged barefoot, golden cracks running up his arms like lightning veins. His gaze burned, his breath steamed, his voice low and steady. They buried the wrong boy. He didn't return to the village. He turned his back to it forever. With every step into the forest, the wind shifted, following him like a loyal dog. Birds fell silent. Trees tilted slightly toward his path, as if recognizing their sovereign. He walked until human sound disappeared, until green swallowed all trace of man. There, in a hollow basin lit by shafts of gold light, Elijah stopped. His hands, still glowing, reached for the soil, not to beg, but to shape. He dug, not with fear, but with purpose. The earth responded. Roots split, water rose, stones lifted. He was building, not shelter, but something sacred. A beginning. The forest gave him tools, and his mind gave him vision. By moonlight, he carved arches from fallen trunks that shimmered like polished bronze. With a single touch, vines obeyed, twisting into staircases and windows. A house rose from the dirt. Not made, but grown. Walls of bark, floors of crystal moss, lanterns of glowing fungi. Foxes curled at his feet. Owls watched from high beams like sentinels. Elijah stood at the threshold, shirtless, his muscles now lean and divine. He was no longer just a boy. He was myth taking shape, but power does not go unnoticed. And the village had begun to whisper. Aaron saw the glow from the hills on the 3rd night. "What's that fire in the woods?" someone asked. He said nothing, but his knuckles whitened. Guilt, rot-like, had begun to fester in his chest, though he'd never admit it. He hadn't slept well since the burial, kept seeing Elijah's eyes in his dreams. Alive, aware, unforgiving. The village priest began warning of unnatural lights and beasts behaving strangely. But the children whispered tales of a glowing king in the trees. They said he built a palace for ghosts. They said he was waiting. Elijah sat cross-legged beneath the heart tree, an ancient giant pulsing with slow golden light. His fingers touched the roots, and visions poured into him like rivers into sea. He saw how the forest had once belonged to a kingdom of light, now broken, forgotten. He saw the pain of its creatures, hunted and silenced by men with axes and pride. He felt their sorrow and their loyalty. "I am no king," he whispered. "But I will protect you." From the shadows, a great black stag approached, its antlers glimmering with moss and silver dew. It bowed. Elijah didn't command it. He bowed back. The forest had chosen him. He called it Silveria, the empire of roots, stone, and starlight, not built with coin or blood, but with harmony and purpose. Each day, another creature joined him. Foxes, crows, bears, even a wounded lynx. He healed them with glowing hands, his touch humming like a song the earth remembered. Soon, trees twisted into towers, streams curved into moats, crystals bloomed like flowers, and he was no longer alone. Wanderers and exiles found him. A blind girl with vines in her hair, a boy burned by his father's rage. He gave them shelter, gave them tasks, gave them dignity, and from their hands, Silveria grew. It was no longer a forest. It was a legend being written in real time. Back in the village, the air grew heavy, the crops wilted, animals vanished. The mayor called for a town meeting, but no one could explain what was wrong. Only Aaron knew, and it burned his soul. "I think he's still alive," he said in a whisper that felt like a scream. The priest gasped. "Then he's not a boy anymore. He's a vessel of vengeance." They organized a hunting party, armed men with fire and crosses. "We'll burn the forest if we have to," the mayor said, trembling beneath his pride. But the wind shifted that night, and in it, they swore they heard Elijah's voice. "I remember everything." Elijah stood atop a balcony of woven branches, watching the forest ripple with movement. Every leaf was alert. Every shadow bristled with warning. "They're coming," said the blind girl beside him, her irises milky but glowing faint green. "I know," Elijah replied. His voice was calm, but thunder curled beneath it. He wore a cloak of bark and gold-threaded ivy, his chest bare, arms lined with glowing runes. The empire behind him shimmered, bridges of crystal, towers of stone-veined wood, life breathing in every brick. "I didn't build this to fight," he whispered, "but I'll defend it." The stag behind him stomped, ready, and far away, the first torch flickered in the night. Men had entered Silveria. They came like parasites, axes gleaming, breath ragged with fear. The forest twisted around them, confusing trails, reordering trees. "Don't stray!" Aaron shouted, haunted eyes darting through the mist. But it was too late. One man vanished between two oaks, never seen again. Another fired an arrow, only to have it curve back and pierce his own leg. Elijah watched through the trees, unseen, unmoving, testing. He could end them in an instant, but he needed them to understand. At last he stepped into their path, light pulsing beneath his skin. "Are you here to bury me again?" he asked, voice like wind through stone. Aaron dropped his torch. Silence fell. Even the wind stopped. Aaron stepped forward, older now, but no less broken inside. "I thought you were dead." "I was," Elijah said simply. "You buried a boy. The forest raised something else." The others trembled. One man wet himself. Elijah's eyes, molten gold, infinite pain, pierced through every guilty heart. "I don't want your village," he said, "but I'll never let it harm this place." He turned to Aaron. "You're the only one I came for." Aaron fell to his knees. "Then take me." But Elijah didn't strike. He opened his hand and offered mercy. Aaron stared at Elijah's hand, calloused yet radiant, trembling with restrained power. He had expected wrath, not grace, and that made it worse. "I was cruel, a coward. Why are you sparing me?" "Because someone has to break the cycle," Elijah
Behind
replied.
him,
The forest glowed, not with fire, but with forgiveness. "The world doesn't need more punishment. It needs rebirth." Aaron sobbed, collapsing fully to the mossy ground, his pride dissolving into dirt. Elijah turned to the others. "Leave. Speak of what you saw. Let truth replace legend." No one disobeyed. They dropped their weapons and vanished into the woods. And Aaron stayed, a boy once more, swallowed by regret. Days passed. Aaron remained in Silveria, silent, helping where he could. He tended to the gardens, repaired bridges, slept beneath glowing vines. The blind girl forgave him first, handing him a bowl of fruit and a smile. The lynx curled beside him one evening, sensing something inside him shifting. Aaron had never known peace before. Not like this. Elijah watched from a distance, never speaking of the past again. Instead, he taught Aaron how to hear the trees, how to move without forcing. Power, he explained, was not in conquest, but in communion. And slowly, the forest began to accept Aaron too, because Silveria had room for redemption. Word of the glowing kingdom spread beyond the village, beyond the mountains. Artists, exiles, dreamers began to arrive, broken people with bright hearts. Elijah welcomed each with quiet strength. No crown, no throne, only open hands. They brought gifts, books, music, seeds, ideas, and Silveria bloomed anew. Tree homes rose higher. Bridges danced between branches. Colors never seen before filled the skies. No guards, no gold, only balance, creation, and wonder. And at the center, Elijah, bare-chested, eyes glowing, a king without ego. Children followed him like birds, laughter trailing behind. He spoke little, but when he did, it was enough to move stone. Build a world so beautiful, cruelty forgets how to survive. But peace always attracts envy. From the capital city across the valley, a new threat emerged. Armored men who feared what they didn't control. They heard tales of a black king in the woods who bent nature to his will. "No empire grows without tribute," said Lord Halston, a cold-eyed warlord drunk on conquest. He sent scouts. None returned. Then he sent soldiers, and they returned with stories instead of victories. Stories of music that stopped time, of trees that swallowed blades, of a man with fire in his veins. Halston laughed and raised an army. "You can't reason with miracles," he said. "You crush them." Elijah knew they were coming before the birds did. He stood beneath the heart tree, his fingers brushing its bark like skin. He wasn't afraid, not for himself, but for everything he'd helped bloom. "I won't let them take this," he murmured, voice low and sacred. The forest answered with a wind so strong it bent trees backward. Behind him stood Aaron, the blind girl, the lynx, the exiles, no longer victims, but guardians. "We fight?" Aaron asked, gripping a staff made of woven ash. Elijah shook his head slowly. "We protect." And that night Silveria shifted. Trees thickened, roots awakened, the air itself began to shimmer. The empire had prepared itself. They marched with fire, torches raised like insults, boots crushing every flower in their path. But as they crossed into Silveria, the flames dimmed, and then vanished. Their weapons rusted in their hands. Horses panicked and fled into the mist. The army hesitated. Some men wept without knowing why. And then Elijah appeared, walking calmly across a bridge made of living vines. He stood tall, shirtless, arms glowing, each step birthing green beneath his feet. "You came for a war," he said, his voice wrapping around their bones. "But there's no war here." "Only awakening," Lord Halston snarled, sword raised. "Then bleed for it." And the forest roared. Roots erupted from the ground like serpents, coiling around swords and legs, snapping steel like twigs. Trees bent low, shielding Silveria's people behind walls of living bark. The wind turned against the invaders, howling, screaming, carrying voices from 1,000 years ago. Halston swung his blade, cutting air, blinded by his own fury. Elijah never moved. His eyes were closed, body glowing like a star caught in human skin. "Violence isn't your enemy," he murmured. "It's the silence inside you that you fear." A wall of light surged outward from his chest, not fire, not lightning, but truth. Men dropped their weapons, weeping. Visions of who they could have been flooded their minds. One by one they fled, not wounded, but transformed. All except Halston. Halston stood alone, breath ragged, fury unraveling into something colder. Desperation. "You think this peace makes you powerful?" he spat, stepping forward. "I think kindness does," Elijah answered. With a scream, Halston lunged. Blade aimed straight for Elijah's heart. Time slowed. Leaves froze mid-air. Even the lynx stopped breathing. But Elijah didn't flinch. He caught the blade in one glowing hand and melted it. Molten steel dripped harmlessly to the moss below. Halston collapsed, sobbing, the weight of his failure heavier than any sword. Elijah knelt. "You can stay. You can rebuild. Or you can disappear." Halston chose silence and walked into the mist alone. Silveria stood untouched. No blood spilled, no life taken. Word of what happened spread across kingdoms like wildfire in scripture. A forest that defended itself without war. A boy once buried who rose not for revenge, but for creation. People came not to conquer, but to learn. Healers, philosophers, kings who had lost their way, all crossed the threshold barefoot. And Elijah. He remained at the center, quiet, unbothered by titles. He taught children how to speak to rivers, how to listen to trees, how to dream in colors no language could name. His story had begun in dirt and cruelty, but now it bloomed, and the world bloomed with him. There was no throne in Silveria, only a circle of stones where people sat as equals. Elijah never crowned himself. He planted gardens instead. The blind girl became a guide for new arrivals, seeing truths sight could not reveal. Aaron taught children to carve bridges from wood and sorrow, his guilt transformed into purpose. Even the stag grew old beside Elijah, antlers now covered in blooming ivy. And though the empire glittered like fantasy, it was no illusion. It breathed, adapted, welcomed, a living testament to mercy over might. Elijah still walked barefoot, muscles strong, eyes burning with quiet fire. He belonged to the earth, not above it, and the earth loved him back. Sometimes Elijah would wander alone to the edge of the woods, watching the village from afar. He never stepped back into it, though many from there now begged to join Silveria. The mayor had grown old and bitter. The merchant who once slapped Elijah now sold mushrooms from his shack. But Elijah felt no hate, only distance, a necessary silence. He knew that returning would make him small again, and he had grown too wide for those old walls. Once a young girl ran into the forest crying, "Are the stories true?" He knelt, smiled, and handed her a fruit shaped like a star. "They're not stories," he said softly. "They're blueprints." And she carried the seed back to her people. Seasons passed like pages in a divine book. Silveria evolved, no longer just forest, but living archive. Each stone held a memory, each leaf a whisper from a healed soul. Elijah aged slowly, as if the forest rationed time for him with reverence. His skin remained smooth, his body strong, but his eyes deepened, heavy with joy, not sorrow. He would sometimes sit beneath the heart tree with a baby in his arms, telling no stories, only humming forgotten lullabies. The forest never feared death. It saw it as transformation. And so did Elijah. He wasn't building forever. He was building what came after. One night, a storm rolled across the valley. No rain, only thunder. Elijah stood at the top of Silveria's tallest tower, wind wrapping his cloak like prophecy. He closed his eyes, listening to a sound only he could hear, the forest humming a farewell. Not an end, but a shift, a handover, a next breath. He knew his time was near, not in death, but in becoming something else. "I was never meant to stay," he said, his voice calm, weightless. Below him, the empire glowed in perfect silence. No fear, only readiness. He touched the crystal branch beneath his feet, and it pulsed once with gold. A stag cried in the distance. The lynx curled up at the heart tree, and Elijah disappeared. No one found his body. No grave was dug. No monument raised. Instead, the forest itself changed. A new tree grew at the center of Silveria. Tall, wide, with bark the color of midnight and leaves like burning embers. Its roots spread faster than nature should allow, touching every edge of the empire. And when people sat beneath it, they felt him, his warmth, his wisdom, his unwavering golden stillness. The blind girl called it the Elijah tree. Children called it home. And no war ever entered Silveria again. Years later, when people spoke of Elijah, they did not speak of magic. They spoke of mercy. They spoke of how he chose healing over revenge, how he was buried alive, and rose not as a god, but as a guide. They told of a beggar who built paradise, not for himself, but for anyone forgotten, of how cruelty tried to silence him, and ended up giving him a kingdom. They quoted his simplest lesson: build so beautifully that cruelty forgets how to survive. And across the world, forests were planted, because his empire was never made of stone, it was made of possibility. In distant cities, where buildings choked the sky and cruelty wore suits, rumors spread. Of a forest empire where no one ruled and yet everything thrived. Of a boy who had been spit on, beaten, buried, who became more than myth. At first they laughed, then they came. Some seeking power, others seeking peace. But only those with open hands and quiet hearts were allowed past the threshold. The forest knew. Elijah had taught it how to listen. And those who entered and stayed changed. They planted, they healed. They remembered how to be whole. And Silveria grew without ever expanding. Aaron became a teacher. His voice, once full of arrogance, now dripped with humility and wonder. He told children the truth of what he had done and what Elijah chose not to do. And through that confession, others found courage to speak their own shame. The blind girl became a poet, her verses woven into the branches of trees, sung by birds. Even Lord Halston returned one day, barefoot, gaunt, carrying a single seed. He knelt at the Elijah tree and wept, asking for no forgiveness, only a place to rest. He died under its branches years later, smiling, because in Silveria, even monsters were allowed to become men again, and no one's story ended in the same place it began. 100 years passed, then 2. The world outside shifted, screamed, evolved, but Silveria remained untouched, not frozen, but eternal in spirit. Its towers grew new branches, its streams changed paths, its people stayed kind. Pilgrims came not to marvel, but to learn how to build their own Silverias. And wherever they went, they planted a piece of Elijah, a school here, a sanctuary there, a child named after him, with fire in their veins. Legends blurred into truths, truths into inspiration, and the world slowly bent toward beauty again, because one boy, buried alive, refused to stay underground. In time, scholars debated whether Elijah ever truly existed. They argued over dates, artifacts, and the lack of written law in Silveria, but the people who lived there never doubted. They didn't need books. They had the trees. And when someone sat alone beneath the Elijah tree, broken or lost, they swore they felt a hand on their shoulder, warm and still, a whisper in the leaves. You're not buried. You're planted. Children who never knew his name still built bridges with curved edges like his sketches. Women braided their hair with gold-threaded ivy, and men wept openly, unashamed, in the middle of gardens. A boy arrived one morning, barefoot, scar on his cheek, sketchbook in hand. He had walked for 7 days, chased from every town for drawing things that didn't exist. The blind poet greeted him. She was old now, her hair silver, her eyes still glowing. She touched his face and smiled. You carry the storm he once carried. They gave him a small hut, a place to draw, and silence. Within weeks, he had designed a bridge that sang when you walked across it. No one questioned his ideas. No one laughed. And under the Elijah tree, he whispered, I thought I was crazy, but maybe I was just early. The forest, of course, agreed. On the 200th anniversary of Elijah's rise, the villagers from his birthland arrived barefoot. They brought their children, their regrets, their stories, twisted, and incomplete. The village was poor now. The wealth it clung to had crumbled like dry bread. And yet they were welcomed. Aaron's great-granddaughter embraced them, eyes bright with recognition and grace. No one was mocked. No one turned away. They were led to the heart tree, where birds sang lullabies in a tongue older than grief. There, one of the elders knelt in the soil and whispered, "We buried a beggar, but the forest raised a king." And for the first time in generations, their children smiled without shame. Now, when someone is cast aside, when a dreamer is mocked, when a child is told they'll never be more, people tell Elijah's story, not as fantasy, as proof. They speak of the boy with dark skin and bare feet, buried in hatred but reborn in light, of the forest that raised him not to conquer, but to heal, of the empire with no throne, only roots, no walls, only welcome, and always, always, they repeat his words. Build so beautifully that cruelty forgets how to survive. It's not just a legend. It's a blueprint etched in the heart of every outcast who dares to rise. Somewhere deep within Silveria, past the waterfall bridge and the whispering stones, there's a single sapling that glows even at night. It is said to grow only when someone truly broken steps into the forest with an open heart. No one knows who plants it, but elders say it's Elijah, not as a man but as a force, a presence, a knowing. And when people kneel beside it, they feel the air shift, the soil warm, the pain ease. They rise different, lighter, rooted, not because they were saved, but because they were finally seen. And that's all Elijah ever wanted. Elijah's story did not end in revenge or glory. It ended in seeds, planted in forests, in hearts, in choices made quietly across the world. He was never just a beggar or a king or a myth. He was a reminder that even when buried in the darkest dirt, something sacred can still grow. So if you find yourself cast out, forgotten, broken, walk barefoot into your own forest and build something so beautiful they can never bury you again.